Okay, so commander cards. I think we're just gonna do these ones all in one go because there's only like 20 or so new cards in total. I think maybe a bit more, but either way, we'll get through them. So we'll start with the commanders. From the top, Bring to the Demagogue, 3-mana 1/3 flyer, very political card, which is very much what this color combination is trying to do. Reminiscent of Edric from I think the original Commander product, if I'm not mistaken. So bear with me because this is very complicated. We'll parse it out. Whenever a player attacks one of your opponents, if that opponent has more life than another of your opponents, that attacking player draws a card and you put 2/1/1 counters on a creature you control. So this is like a lot of them, but not you, only if, but like this is not winning awards for templating, but this is probably the most simple version that they could find. So basically, whenever anybody attacks an opponent of yours, so whenever anybody, including you, attacks anybody that isn't you, if the person being attacked has more life than any one other opponent, then the person doing the attacking gets the draw card, and you, specifically you, get to put 2 counters on your creatures. So obviously, if you're the one doing the attacking and somebody has more life, if you're attacking an opponent, you're attacking an opponent that has more life than another one of your opponents, you'll get the draw card and put 2 counters on your thing. But then the flip side is that anytime anyone else does the attacking, they get to draw the card, but you remain the only person buffing your creatures. So your creatures are getting bigger anytime anyone attacks anyone else and the satisfactory criteria are met. It's a little bit confusing. It's a lot of stuff happening. It's also just not really my cup of tea in terms of what I like to play. So I'm not focusing on this, but it is a really interesting design and probably will lead to a lot of very neat politicking at the table if that's what your playgroup is into doing. The other face commander is Felicia, Fang of Silverquill, a 4-mana 3/3 flyer with Mentor. Haven't seen that one in a while. Actually, no, that's not true. We've seen that somewhat recently. This was the Boros ability from the most recent Ravnica visit. I think. I'm pretty sure. Whenever this creature attacks, put a 1/1 counter on target other attacking creature with lesser power. So it makes other things that are attacking at the same time that are smaller than her bigger. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, if it had counters on it, aka if you were able to mentor onto it, although of course there are other synergies you can use here, create X tapped 2/1 flying white-black inklings, where X is the number of counters it had on it. So basically for the number, like you'll get a bunch of 1/1 or a bunch of these flyers, the bigger the creature that died was, more or less, at least in terms of the number of counters it had. It's kind of interesting. It's very much like an attacking matters black-white deck, which actually I think is interesting design space. That hasn't been a black-white thing in Commander very often. Whether or not it's good is hard to say. She does fly, which means she herself is not super likely to get messed with in combat. So you'll probably get to attack with her pretty consistently. I was very curious to see how this fares. I do think that this card is probably completely broken with a Kathos Crusade in play, although that's more because Kathos Crusade is a messed up card. But Crusade's going to be spreading the counters all over the place. When a thing with counters dies, you'll get a bunch of flyers, and then you'll get counters on everything equal to the number of flyers you just got. So it'll snowball out of control pretty fast, I suspect. Also, notably, herself dying does trigger this ability. So if she is removed and had some counters on her, she will also get some creatures back out of it, which is cool. Then next we've got the Prismari commanders. So we've got Veyran, Voice of Duality, 3-mana 2/2 with Magecraft, gets +1/+1 till end of turn. The Magecraft trigger is pretty boring, to be honest. We're gonna kind of ignore that one. But the ability is not boring at all. The ability is essentially a Panharmonicon for instants and sorceries. So if you are casting or copying an instant or sorcery spell, if you casting or copying an instant or sorcery spell causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So again, the best example I can think of, again, because I'm maybe not putting it in my own Kaikar deck, so that's sort of like the baseline I'm going from, is Kaikar, whenever you cast it's any non-creature spell for Kaikar, but if I'm casting an instant or sorcery, and that causes Kaikar's make a spirit token ability to trigger, the Veyran will actually give me a second token, because that trigger is happening as a result of me casting that particular instant or sorcery. So it's obviously a little bit more situational than a Panharmonicon is. but it can be potentially very powerful because like there are a lot of triggered abilities that happen when you do stuff, right? This works with like any of the like whenever you cast X, make a creature, right? Mentor the Meek, or not Mentor the Meek, Monastery Mentor, the War Sahili, Talrand, all of these things will trigger off of this ability, trigger a second time off of this ability, which is kind of cool. Zephi, Thunder Conductor, with the extremely unfortunate misprint of the text referring to him as Zephi Thunder Collector, even though that's not the name. Like, quality control, please. But either way, the ability is interesting. 4 mana 1/4 with Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, scry 1. So that'll happen no matter what. Every time you cast an instant or sorcery spell or copy one, scry 1. If the spell's mana value is 5 or greater, you also get a 4/4 blue creature. And if the spell's mana value is somehow 10 or greater, you also get to deal 10 damage to an opponent chosen at random. That last part, I think, is mostly just like for the lulz. I don't know how much you're supposed to be building around that, but I do think it's pretty reasonable to be able to build a deck around getting a 4/4 every time you do this, which is pretty cool. You're going to want a lot of mana rocks in this deck because your curve's going to be pretty dang high from what I can tell, but it's a powerful ability if you can build around it consistently. We get next is Guillaume, Master Chef. For any of the non-francophones here, this is just a really cringe but also oddly amusing play on the name Guillaume, Guillaume, which is just like a very sort of classically French name, and like French chef, whatever. Like that's the joke. It's Guillaume the chef, except it's spelt Guillaume as opposed to anyway. That's the joke. Anyway, but we do get a Golgari Food Commander, which people have been asking for ever since Eldraine came out. So this is a 4 mana 5/3 with Trample, already a pretty reasonable body. At the beginning of your end step, create a number of food tokens equal to the number of non-token creatures you had enter the battlefield under your control this turn. Now, it is a bit of a shame that it says non-token, because it doesn't actually work well with pests and stuff that are like pretty like part and parcel, part of the whole Witherbloom color identity thing. So I'm not really sure what's going on with that, but it's probably just to prevent you from having like 86 food or whatever. But it does put a damper on what you can do with this. You're going to want a bunch of like cheap creatures. So I guess this works well with like mana dorks and like cheap like Bloodghasty type effects, right? Where you can recur them over time and like sacrifice them and recur them, etc., etc. And then of course it has the ability to sack a food. It basically grants an additional ability to food as long as he's out, which is to sack a food. Target creature gains indestructible until the end of turn. Tap it. So you can save creatures, including himself, from dying by sacking a food. I sort of like the idea that his food is so potent that it will literally save you from death. That's kind of cool. Must be good food. Willowdusk Essencer is the other Witherbloom commander. 3 mana 3/3 with the ability of 1 tap, choose another target creature, and then put a number of 1/1 counters on it equal to the amount of life you gained this turn, or the amount of life you lost this turn, whichever is greater. So you either paid a bunch of life into like a Necropotence, or you gained a bunch of life off of Soul Warden triggers, or I guess Essence Warden for playing green-black. But whichever number is greater, you will get that number of counters on another creature. Now, notably, she cannot target herself, but that's still a pretty cool ability, honestly. And definitely another payoff with those sort of like life gain plus counters matters type cards. The Dean that we were talking about on earlier on the stream and in an earlier video, if you're watching this on YouTube, would work well with this, which is cool. Then we get the Lorehold stuff. These ones are the ones I'm like honestly very excited about because Lorehold, like I said, really pushing into new design space with this release, which is exactly what that color combination needed. Alibu, Ancient Witness, is a 5 mana 4/5 artifact that gives all other artifact creatures you control haste. And then it says whenever one or more artifact creatures you control attacks, Alibu deals X damage to any target and you scry X, where X is the number of tapped artifacts you control. So basically, this is card. I don't know what you want to call it. It's not even really card selection because you're not getting cards out of this, but it's giving you the ability to like manage your draws, top deck manipulation basically, and removal and damage, right? Because this can go anywhere, right? Planeswalkers, creatures, players, whatever. And interestingly as well, this only refers to the number of tapped artifacts you control. So all you need to do is attack with like an Ornithopter or like a Thopter token or whatever. And then if you have like a bunch of tapped mana rocks for whatever reason, you'll still get a larger X because it's not reliant on the number of attacking artifacts you control, which is a really nice shift. That's, I feel like previous design would have said, where X is the number of artifacts you attacked with this turn or something, and that would have been much worse because it would have forced attacks. Here, all you need to do is one single artifact attacking at any point to trigger the whole thing, and you can have plenty of other ways of tapping your artifacts outside of combat, and you'll get the whole payoff, which I think is really cool. Definitely a very neat build-around creature, for sure. The other one is Ozgear the Reconstructor. It's a 4-mana 4/4 with Vigilance, so already a pretty solid stat body. Sack an artifact for 1, target creature you control gets +2/+0 till end of turn. Really, this artifact, this ability is pretty irrelevant on the balance. What it is it's basically just giving you a sack outlet for your artifacts to power the second ability, which is where the meat and potatoes is. X mana and tap. Exile an artifact card with mana value X from your graveyard. So you're paying the exact mana cost, mana value of the card that you're getting, but you're getting 2 tokens that are a copy of the exiled card. Now, you can only do it as a sorcery, which means you can only do it once and only on your turn. Well, actually, if you can untap him manually in your own turn and you have enough mana, you can actually do this more than once, but you don't get to do it on opponent's turns, unfortunately. But, like, again, the use case here being that, you sack your Soul Ring for 1 mana, right? Tap Soul Ring. Like, this is actually like a very reasonable use case. Tap Soul Ring for 2 mana. Use 1 mana to sacrifice your Soul Ring to the Ozgear. Use the other mana to activate the Ozgear's ability. Exile the Soul Ring from your graveyard. Now you have 2 untapped Soul Rings that now generate 4 mana. And like, that's a very, very minimal baseline thing to do in Commander, right? Like, you're going to have Soul Rings. That's the whole thing. It's the Soul Ring format. So, like, that's a really strong ability. And that's actually like a massively mana positive ability. Now, that's partially just on the back of Soul Ring being a messed up card, but still, don't sleep on this card. This card does powerful things. And then our last 2 sets of the new commanders before we go into the cards inside the deck. We have Adrix and Nev, Twin Casters. So we saw Vorinclex in the last set, Kaldheim. That was that doubled all of the counters. Right? He was the better part of a doubling season for your creatures, right? Doubled all the counters on your stuff and then have the counters on your opponent's stuff. This card is the other half of that, right? This is the Parallel Lives Commander. So it's a 4-mana 2/2 with Ward 2. And if 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, twice that many of those tokens are created instead, right? So if you're going to make 1, make 2. If you're going to make 2, make 4, so on and so forth. You basically just, like, put this in your deck that's making tokens and make many tokens. That's the joke. That's the whole thing. And it's powerful. Like, this is a really, really strong ability, especially because it has Ward 2, which is not, like, unbeatable or anything, but it makes it hard to remove. It makes it definitely a pain in the butt to remove. And having a copy of Parallel Lives in your command zone is going to be good, I promise you, if you're building towards it. The other one is Essex Fractal Bloom, which is a 6-mana 4/4 flyer. Legendary creature Fractal, which I think is awesome. The first time you would create 1 or more tokens during each of your turns, you may instead choose a creature other than Essex Fractal Bloom and create that many tokens that are copies of that creature. So this basically wants you to be doing 2 things. It wants you to have a cool creature that you want multiple copies of in play, and it wants you to be doing something that lets you make tokens. So I think one of the most sort of, one of the easiest ways to look, like one of the like base level versions of this card is you have an Essex on turn 6, or like with 6 mana. On turn 7, you cast Avenger of Zendikar. Let's say you have 7 lands in play. So here's what's going to happen. Avenger of Zendikar enters the battlefield. Trigger makes 7 plant tokens. But Essex says that I can replace that with an instance of copying another creature instead, which each of those tokens. So those 7 plant tokens will now all enter as Avengers of Zendikar. So at the end of this, you have 8 Avengers of Zendikar, and then 7 of them now are having their own triggers resolving. So you're going to have 7 times 7, which is what, 49? I'm terrible at math. Don't yell at me, chat, or YouTube, please. But I think it's 49. Bottom line is you're going to have a butt ton of plants, and you're going to have 7 things, which means any landfall trigger will put 8 counters on all of your plants. And like, that's just like, that's not even a Christmas land scenario. That's just like a very reasonable turn 6, turn 7. if your opponents didn't have removal for the Essex or the Avenger. So that's really cool. That's really good. And again, like that is a thing that you are going to see people doing more often than not. So yeah, be careful of Essex. This can lead to some pretty runaway board states. All right, so that's it for the commanders. As far as the contents of the deck cards, our first one up is Angel of the Ruins. I really love some of the new white cards here, by the way. Some of them I don't. Basically, I don't like any of the Silverquill ones because they're all political and I hate playing politics, at least that kind of politics. You'll see what I mean. But I love the Lorehold ones because they're all about recursion, and that I do love doing. So Angel of the Ruins is a 7-mana 5/7 with flying. When it enters the battlefield, you exile up to 2 target artifacts and or enchantments. So it basically has a Crush Contraband type of effect attached to the 5/7 flyer, right? So you're definitely getting more than what you're paying for in the form of you're getting a 7-mana 5/7 flyer, which is like not impressive, but a solid body once it's resolved, with like 4 mana worth of spells attached to that, essentially. And then if that's not what you want, if you draw this in your opening hand, you're just like, I do not need the 7-drop in my hand. You can Planescycle this for 2 mana. So you can just convert this into a land that you can play to kind of accelerate your curve. Or not accelerate your curve, but like, you know, continue making your land drops, right? Keep yourself in the game. And then later you can recur it with like any number of things because white is good at recursion. So this really works all like very nicely at almost every stage of the game with being a relevant ETB, a solid body, and having a fail case for if you draw it too early and you don't have a use for that yet. Love this card. Really, really like this card. Not every deck's going to want it, but a lot of decks will. The next one is the one that's got a lot of people buzzing. I'm not the only one who's high on this card for sure. The price reflects that, unfortunately. Is Archaeomancer's Map. So this is white ramp done well. This is what white ramp should look like. This is the best version of it I think they've done so far. So Archaeomancer's Map is a 3-drop artifact that when it ATVs, you can search your library for up to 2 basic plains cards, so no mana fixing. It's still just white mana, but still, that's fine. Reveal them, put it in your hand, then shuffle. So for 3 mana, you put 2 plains in your card. So this is sort of like a wonky divination at its base, right? You're not drawing into gas, it's guaranteed to be 2 lands, but in a white deck, that's often good. Because you just want to make your land drops and not get buried by the green decks casting a Rampant Growth and a Cultivated Return. The additional part, and what makes this really strong, is that it says whenever a land enters the battlefield under opponent's control, if that player controls more lands than you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Now, you've just drawn 2 lands from your hand. So, assuming that you're not the one who's the furthest ahead on land drops, you're going to get to put 1 or more lands into play over the course of multiple turn cycles. And again, this also sticks around, right? It's not a sorcery. So if you draw into lands later in the game, for whatever reason, like you draw more lands than you can play lands per turn, this doesn't lose its ability. The last thing that I really like about this is that because it's a permanent with an enters the battlefield ability, you can blink it, you can recur it, right? Sacrifice this, get it back with a Sun Titan, get 2 more lands in your hand. Blink it with, I don't know, Brago, Felidar Guardian, with Flicker Wisp, whatever you want. Do it again. And so it has lasting value on the board, even beyond the original ETB trigger, while letting you stay more or less at parity with your opponents through providing you the ability to play those lands outside of your basic land drops per turn, right? This card is like somewhere between a Cultivate, a Divination, and a Burgeoning, and it's none of those cards individually, but the combination of being a little bit of all of them makes it very, very good, especially, again, in decks that are not green, that do not have access to clean forms of ramp otherwise, right? This is really good in mono white, of course, but in mono blue, in white blue, in white, really in white, anything except green. Any non-green deck that's white probably wants this card, or at least should be thinking about it. Maybe not like a 4-color non-green deck. Let me rephrase it. Basically, any 2-color non-green deck wants this card if you're playing white, which is like, what, 4 guilds, 5 guilds? Not bad. I like it a lot. Next we have Bronze Guardian. Not a huge fan of this one. It's kind of just like a big dummy, but it's fine. It's a 5-mana X5 with double strike. Its power is equal to the number of artifacts you control, so the more artifacts you have, the bigger it is, the harder it hits. Seems fine. And then all other artifacts you control have word 2. So it makes your artifacts harder to interact with. It's not bad. Especially in white. Like the closest thing I can think of for this is like Padim, and this is not blue. Like Padim is blue and draws you a card whenever you play an artifact, but like giving your artifacts protection is good, especially if you don't have access to blue for other things. I'm not in love with this card, but if you're playing a mono white aggressive based artifact deck, this is solid. This could definitely do some stuff for you. Combat Calligrapher is weird. This is one of the weird Silverquill ones that I'm just like not really high on. So it's a 4-mana 3/3 flyer that says Inklings can't attack you or planeswalkers you control. And whenever a player attacks one of your opponents, that attacking player creates a tapped 2/1 white and black Inkling creature token with flying that's attacking that opponent. So basically, as long as your opponents are attacking each other, they get extra random flyers that could also get in with and start attacking. The problem is that if this gets removed, nothing's stopping the Inklings they've gotten. So like the idea is your opponent might like play along with this for a while, and then if they like figure you're getting kind of annoying and they've gotten like 2 or 3 Inklings out of you, just kill the Combat Calligrapher and then like, oh, guess what? I get to attack you with all these random flyers you gave me now. Thanks for that, buddy. I don't know. It's just not the kind of political card I like. I don't like helping my opponents. I just don't. Not in a format like Commander. It's just like too dangerous. Like you have 3 opponents, there's only one of you. If you're helping all of them, odds are one of them is going to kick your butt with the stuff that you will help them do. So not my cup of tea anyway. Jigsaw Engineer is great. I think this card's really cool. Again, not good for every deck, but if you're playing a heavy artifact-based white deck, it's pretty good. 3-mana 3/3. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, you may pay 2, and if you do, create an 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token. With this creature gets 1/1 for each artifact you control. So basically, all of your artifact spells come with an extra rider of pay 2 mana, make a construct, right? We've seen them primarily off of Karn, but there's a couple other cards that make them as well. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger for each artifact you have. Or for each artifact, for each artifact you control, and each artifact you control gets you more. And then they see each other and grow bigger and bigger and bigger, and it can kind of snowball out of control. 2 is not a cheap tax, right? Like 2 is a meaningful tax, but getting a whole creature out of that extra 2 for free is really, really good, I think. Next we've got Excavation Technique. This is part of a cycle of spells with Demonstrate, which is a mechanic they've introduced in these precons, which basically say that when you cast a spell, you may copy it, so you get an extra copy, but if you do copy it, you also have to let an opponent copy it, and they get to choose all their own targets. So, little risky. You get more, but someone else might mess with the more you got. So, 4 mana for destroy target non-land permanent. Its controller creates 2 treasure tokens. For 4 mana in mono white, this is pretty reasonable removal, right? This gets rid of planeswalkers. This gets rid of, largest creatures. Although, again, white's not hard up for dealing with creatures. But again, getting rid of planeswalkers, primarily planeswalkers, really, I think is the biggest thing that this gives white that it couldn't already do. I don't know how much I love it, honestly. Giving your opponent 2 treasures is not nothing, right? That's potentially randoming them from like 5 to 7 or 6 to 8 or whatever, and suddenly like, oh boy, like now we're expropriating way ahead of schedule or whatever. You do get to copy it, so blow up 2 things. But again, if you're targeting the same opponent, like be careful, because now you're giving them 4 treasures, and guess what they're going to try to do with those treasures? Probably mess you up for screwing them over. Not to mention you're letting somebody else do something and maybe blow up your own stuff. Is this a risky card? I'm risk averse. I'm not a fan, but it does have flexibility and it does have its uses. So, I wouldn't be surprised to see it happen. We have Guardian Archon, which is a 6-mana 5/5 flyer. As it enters the battlefield, secretly choose an opponent, reveal the player you chose, you and target permanent you control each gain protection from the chosen player until end of turn. Activate only once. This card's really weird. I don't really get it. I don't really like it. This basically says that once per game, assuming the situation happens where both you and another opponent are both being attacked in a meaningful fashion by a third player, you one time get to blank that damage. But it's a 6-mana effect. I mean, it's a 6-mana 5/5 flyer. That's not terrible, but it's just this card is way too cute. This card doesn't actually do anything. I will say that it has sweet owl art. I like that. The art is cool, but I just don't think this card is a good card. It just doesn't. It's just so dopey and so unnecessarily convoluted for such a small overall payoff. Next card is Lochiel Clockwork Scholar. 3-mana 2/4. It says prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to attacking artifact creatures you control. So nice combo with the Alibu, incidentally, right? You get to attack with a bunch of artifacts and they don't get damaged. Meanwhile, you're getting the Alibu trigger. That's great. Whenever one or more artifact creatures enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. But this ability only triggers once each turn. So basically your first artifact creature that you cast every turn will just draw you a card. Which is pretty good, honestly. Like, I'd probably play Ornithopter in a deck that had this and Alibu and whatever. Because, like, you know, it's a 0-mana artifact, gets in easily, triggers a draw card, right? Like, if your Ornithopter also draws a card, it becomes a lot more impressive. Decent little card. It's very specific to artifact creatures, notably. Like, Mana Rocks won't trigger this. But if you are playing an artifact creature deck, like, you know, again, with your Bronze Guardians and stuff, this is pretty cool. Monologue Tax. I hate this card. I really don't like it. And not because I think it's going to be annoying the way that I don't like Smothering Tide, let's say. I think this card is not good enough. I think this card was scared of being as ubiquitous as Smothering Tide, and as a result is, like, not good. So here's the thing. Whenever a caster's second spell each turn, you create a treasure token. So the idea here is that it's trying to create a virtual barrier on how many spells your opponent can cast each turn without incurring a penalty. The penalty here being that you get a treasure token, right? The problem with this is that this is basically going to beat up on the decks that are doing, like, exactly 2 spell turns, where they're basically going to, like, only play 1 spell per turn instead of the 2 they could have played. And they're going to feel bad, they're going to fall behind, and they're going to get annoyed, right? Because they're not going to cast only a second spell, because then it feels like they could have avoided it. It feels preventable. There's a psychological aspect to this that needs to be respected. People, if they're looking at their hand, they're like, I can cast exactly 2 spells. They're going to err on the side of not doing it unless doing it is, like, good enough that it overcomes giving you a treasure, which oftentimes, incidentally, that will be the case. So it's not even always going to stop people from doing it, but if it stops people, it'll be the people that are casting exactly 2 spells. If I have the potential to cast 3, 4, 5 spells this turn, I'm going to do that because I'm happy to give you 1 treasure if it means I get to play my whole suite, like, you know, cast 5 creatures this turn, earn, like, some instants and sorcery spell. 1 treasure is not enough of a barricade against doing big turns, basically, which I think this should be what this should be trying to avoid happening, right? My opinion is that this spell should have been templated whenever an opponent casts a spell, a spell. I don't know. I'm not a templating wizard, but basically any spell that they cast beyond the first one that they cast would generate you a treasure. So if my opponent casts 2 spells, I get a treasure. 3rd spell, get a treasure. 4th spell, get a treasure. It shouldn't be like cumulative where it's like 2 treasures for the 3rd spell, 3 treasures for the 4th spell. That would get out of control. It'd be way too good. But I really think that each spell beyond the first cast should generate a treasure for you. Then the spell would be very good because then there is a meaningful cost attached to every single spell your opponents choose to cast beyond the first one. And I think that would be a fair but punishing way to have this card read. As it stands, I think that you're going to play this and your opponent's going to be like, okay, you're going to have a treasure, and then just kind of like continue on their merry way and combo you out and kill you, and they won't care. Like, this card's not going to do anything in its current state. Except for like at like low to like maybe in like low, maybe mid power tables it might. But I think if your opponents are playing tuned decks, playing at like, you know, a 7 or 8, you know, to use the power scale level. I don't really like doing that, but I still the benchmark right now that there's nothing better to do for it. This is just not going to matter. It just isn't going to matter at all. And so as a result, I don't like this card at all. And I think that honestly, you're probably just doing yourself a disservice, including in your deck when you could be playing a better card. So that's my soapbox about Monologue Tax. Nils Discipline Enforcer, 3 and a 2/2 at the beginning of your end step. For each player, put a 1/1 counter on up to 1 target creature that player controls. Okay, so everybody gets a counter at the end of my end step, including me, but including everybody else too. Each creature with 1 or more counters on it can't attack you or planeswalkers you control unless they pay X, where X is the number of counters on that creature. So this is like a really, really weird, wonky, like sphere of resistance propaganda effect. Except that once again, because it's a creature and it's like a relatively flimsy creature, what people are probably going to do a lot is just sort of build up their creatures and then eventually just like kill your nils and murder you with the creatures that have all gotten like 3 extra 1/1 counters on them or whatever. I don't dig it. I don't like it. I don't like the sort of conditional rattlesnake don't attack me type effects. This just doesn't do enough. This isn't going to get there. Promise of Loyalty is very much in the same vein. Basically, every player puts a vow counter on the creature they control and then sacks the rest. Each of the creatures can't attack you or planeswalkers you control for as long as it has a vow counter on it. Wraths that let opponents choose to keep their best creature, even if they don't get to attack you with them, are still bad. Don't do this. Your opponent's going to keep a creature with like a sicko triggered ability, like their Yarok or their whatever, and then they're just going to keep playing their regular game plan, and you're not and what you did will have done nothing. Because sure, they can't attack you, but they probably weren't attacking with the Yarok anyway. They're just letting it sit there as a glorified Panharmonicon, accruing massive amounts of value. Like, it's just, I don't like these. I don't like these. Giving your opponents a choice is never the good call, because they're always going to make the choice that is the worst choice for you. And that's not good. Scholarship sponsor. It's a 3/3 for 3. It's 3/3 for 4 that enters the battlefield. Each player who controls fewer lands than the player who controls the most lands searches their library for a number of basic lands cards equal to or less than the difference, puts them on the battlefield tab, and shuffles. So this is essentially letting both you, but also the other two players at the table catch up to the person who's the most ahead. I hate it. Again, don't ramp your opponents for them. They don't need the help. They're just going to use that mana to kill you. Don't do it. It's bad. Stop. These cards are not good. They are always traps. You are going to get hosted on your own petard. Moving on. Blue spells. Commander's Insight. X blue for an instant. So that is Blue Sun Zenith territory. Let's see if this is better or worse than that card. Target player draws X plus an additional card for each time they've cast a commander from the command zone this game. So it's a one-shot Blue Sun Zenith effect, but it also spots you additional cards based on how often you've had to recast your commander. So basically, if people are targeting your commander a bunch and forcing it back into the command zone, you'll get extra cards out of it. I don't know that I want to play a card like this in my deck when I could just play Blue Sun Zenith, but it's an interesting ability, and it is nice at least that it sort of like rewards you or sort of compensates you for having gotten your commander sewered whatever number of times it has been sewered so far. It's fine. It's not great. There are better extra spells, even at instant. Curiosity Crafter is a 4-mana 3/3 flyer that gives you no max hand size. Whenever a creature token you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So this card is quite interesting. This card is really quite interesting. It's weird. You want to play it in a token deck, obviously. It will basically have no hand. I mean, it still gives you no max hand size, but obviously you want to be drawing cards. That's the point. So it's a creature that doesn't make tokens, but rewards you for having tokens by letting you draw cards. So it's a little bit strange because it's a bit sideways to a lot of those token plans. But again, it does provide you with that sort of, coastal piracy, Bite and Thassa effect, while also letting you hold a bunch of cards in hand. Now, is this card better than coastal piracy? Probably not, because it's harder to remove a coastal piracy than it is a random 3/3 flyer. But if you're just in the market for as many, Ophidian effects as possible, this could be an inclusion. It's not the worst. Dazzling Sphinx is a 5-mana 4/5 with flying. When it deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile an instant or sorcery card. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then that player puts the exiled cards. That weren't cast this way on the bottom of the library in a random order. This card is actually pretty good, but it's also probably not good enough. This is very much a card that I think is representative of the power creep that's existed in this format for the last few years, where I think if I were to cast this card 10 years ago, it would be busted, right? A very well statted, like a reasonably cheap, efficient flying beater with a very strong hit trigger. The problem is we can just kind of do better than that nowadays. This needs to untap and attack and connect successfully in order to do the things. And jumping through that many hoops is tricky when removal is as efficient as it is nowadays. That being said, if you do get to connect with this, you're going to get to do something pretty cool. Probably. I mean, the thing is, you might also just hit somebody's Swords to Plowshares, which is fine, but might not be worth the whole song and dance you did for it. But on those turns where you hit somebody's Boundless Realms or Time Stretch or whatever, well, first of all, if you hit somebody's Time Stretch, they deserve everything that's about to happen to them. But the bottom line being that, obviously, this card scales with the number of dumb things your opponent's doing in their deck, basically. So that's another knock against it, is that it's only as good as what your opponent is doing. So again, maybe depends on your meta, depends on what kind of opponents you're playing against, what kind of decks they like to play. You'll know if you want this card. It's nothing exciting, but it is a cool effect. Then we have Deca, Fractal Theorists, 5 mana 3/3 with Magecraft. The Magecraft trigger is that you create a fractal where with X counters, where X is the mana value of the spell that triggered Magecraft. Kind of cool. You can potentially get like a bunch of fractals out of this. So this is sort of like a weird Talrand where the creatures aren't flying, but they can be bigger than 2/2s. But it's that same kind of effect of like whenever you cast an instant sorcery, make a token. And then it does get the 4 mana ability to make a target token unblockable this turn. So if you have large fractals and they're getting stalled out on the ground, you can pay 4 and kind of force them through. It's pretty cool. It's not the best. There are better versions of this effect, I think, or at least more efficient versions. But it's another one in that sort of stable, that roster of creatures that make tokens when you cast instants and sorceries. Next we have Inspiring Refrain, which is a 6 mana sorcery that lets you draw 2 cards. Kind of terrible. However, what's going on here? When you cast it, you exile it with 3 time counters on it. So it essentially gains Suspend. So basically every 3 turns, you will get to draw 2 cards for free, essentially. Then it'll just re-exile itself and you'll wait till the next 3 turns. It also has Suspend 3 for 3. So you can cast this on turn 3 and you'll get it by turn 6. But the nice thing is that on turn 6, you won't have to spend the 6 mana to do it. The biggest issue I have with this card is like, how long are your games lasting that you're going to get value out of this? I don't know. Because the earliest you're drawing 2 cards off of this is turn 6. Maybe a little earlier if you had like a Soul Ring start or something. But like, turn 6 pretty consistently. Like maybe turn 5 if we're feeling optimistic about it. So how long are your games lasting? Are they lasting 6 turns? 9 turns? 12 turns? I don't know. Again, the lower power you're playing at, the more likely this is to be good. If you're playing decks that are, you know, tuned decks, right? Probably not. This is really clunky and you are probably not going to get your value out of this card. Because I would want to draw 4 cards off of this minimum before I was happy including it in my deck. And that doesn't seem very likely to me. For 6 mana, I could just be playing Recurring Insight, which is 6 mana, draw cards equal to the number, equal to the number of cards in target opponent's hand with Rebound. That's just like going to draw you so many more cards for the same rough amount of mana. Definitely not a card I'm a big fan of. Muse Vortex. X blue sorcery. Exile top X cards of your library. You may cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value X or less from among them without paying its mana cost. Then put the exiled instant or sorcery cards that weren't cast this way into your hand and the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order. So basically you pay blue X. You get to cast an X drop instant or sorcery from out of these. Every other instant and sorcery that you chose not to cast, you get to put into your hand. So draw them basically. And then any lands and creatures and artifacts and whatever else goes to the bottom of your deck. So you obviously want to cast this in a deck that has a very high density of instants and sorceries, because anything you hit that isn't those are just going to be straight bricks. You'll get no value out of them at all. But if you're running like a deck that has like, you know, 30 or so instants and sorceries, like this will probably be pretty good. Like this is probably decent in a Mizzix deck, or something of the sort. So it could be cool. Octavia Living Thesis is a 10 mana 8/8. Notably, the word of the instance of 8 appears 8 times on the card. Let's count. 1, 2, 3. The word 8 is a bit cheating, but that was the only way for them to get it there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Haha. It's an octopus. It's funny. Anyway, spell costs 8 less to cast if you have 8 or more instants or sorcery cards in your graveyard. So basically, if you got a yard full of spells, this is a 2 mana 8/8. Fine. Ward 8 is essentially just word infinite, if we're being honest. The odds that your opponent is going to have 8 plus cost of removal spell mana to target this are very low. So functionally, this is just has hexproof, but it's ward 8 because they wanted to get an extra 8 on the card. I mean, it's clever design, but it's like, yeah. Basically, this reads as hexproof, more or less. And then it says, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, target other creature gains base power toughness 8/8 till end of turn. So you can get to turn other things and do large 8/8s. It's a bit dopey. It's a bit silly. It's a bit nonsensical. It's funny. But I think it's more of a meme than anything else. Moving on, we have Perplexing Test. Choose one, return all creature tokens to their owner's hands, return all non-token creatures to their owner's hands, or return all non-token creatures. So basically, bounce all tokens or bounce all non-tokens for 5 mana and instant. So it's like... it's basically... It's worse than Evacuate on the face, because Evacuate just bounces everything, but it's better than Evacuate if you are building towards a certain strategy. So basically, you could use this to bounce... Like, if you're playing a heavy token deck, you can basically bounce everybody's non-token creatures, assuming they don't have a lot of those, or not a lot of tokens, and then it's essentially like sort of a 5-mana Plague Wind a little bit, which can be quite strong. Not a staple for every deck, but there are only decks that want this. It's kind of a cool card, and being instant is very powerful. Like, that definitely puts it over the top for me, I think. Replication Technique is the demonstrate card for this deck. Create a token that's a copy of target permanent. If you do it, you can do it twice, but then somebody else gets to make a target token that's a copy of their permanents. So just before demonstrating this, be very, very aware of what permanents your opponents control and whether or not you're okay with them making a copy of the best one they have, because that could lead to some bad things, right? You copy your thing and then demonstrate copy it again. Your opponent's got like a Cabal Coffers. They get 2 coffers now, make like 85 mana, just murder everybody. You probably could have avoided that just by reading their cards. So, you use with caution. Again, not really if any of these demonstrates. They're all pretty high downside and like not really worth the bonus that you're getting, in my opinion. Sly Instigator is mostly just a weird card because I don't at all understand why this card is blue. Goad is a red mechanic, not a blue mechanic. It also probably could have been a Silverquill card just based on the theme and the flavor of it. I don't really understand why this is a blue card, but it is what it is. But yeah, basically blue mana until next turn, targeted creature and opponent controls can't be blocked, and you goad it. So you basically give a creature unblockable, but they can't attack you with it. So you basically just get to sick your opponent's creature on somebody else. They don't have, basically just force your opponent to attack somebody else with a creature for fun and profit, I guess. I don't like it that much, but it is funny. If you're just trying to create like a chaos or silly deck, this could be fun, but it's not great. Spawning Kraken just basically is a 6-mana 6/6 that says whenever you deal damage with with one of your sea monsters, make a 9/9 Kraken. Sure. It's big, it's dopey, it does more big dopey things. Probably fun for your tribal, Eric Smithy's sea monster deck or whatever, but again, you'll know if you want it. If you don't have a lot of Krakens and Octopi and whatever, probably don't play this. Theoretical Duplication. 3 mana for an instant that says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control this turn, create a token that's a copy of that creature. So basically, you want to play this essentially in response to your opponent's first creature spell in order to get a copy of that creature when it enters. It's similar to Fairy Artisans in that way, right? Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you create a token copy of that creature. You're not likely to get more than one creature out of this because your opponent is probably going to stop casting creatures after that unless they're going to win and they don't care that you get another copy of it. So really this just reads 3 mana, get a copy of target creature your opponent is casting this turn, which is fine. But again, yeah, it's not going to be Christmas Land. Like, your opponent's not going to cast multiple creatures into this unless they can do something about the fact that you're getting copies of all of them. There will be decks that want this, but again, don't go around thinking it's going to think, oh, my opponent's going to cast like 6 creatures this turn, I'm going to get a copy of all of them. They're just going to not do that. Because it's an instant, right? The ability goes away at the end of turn. It's not like a creature like Fairy Artisans where they have no choice. Like, it'll always happen until they remove it. So you'll get exactly 1 creature out of this. Hopefully it's a good one. Maybe it's good enough. Next one is Author of Shadows, moving into the black cards. 5 mana 3/3. When Author of the Shadows enters the battlefield, exile all cards from all opponents' yards. So basically just nuke everyone's yards. Yours is the only one that stays safe. Choose a non-land card exiled this way. You may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled. And you may spend mana as though it remain of any color. So whether or not the Author of Shadows sticks around, that one card you chose, you'll always get access to as long as the game is still going. Couple of questions. A, why isn't it for each opponent? That doesn't seem like it'd be too good. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm way off my rocker. I would think it would have been cool if it could target each opponent's, like one, you get one for each opponent. The other problem is be careful if you're playing a deck that cares about its own graveyard, because if somebody copies or clones this, say goodbye to your yard as well. So, you know, don't get double-edged by this one. Cool card though. Very cool card. Blight Mound is real weird. I guess you'll put this in your what is it, Blarg or Bleck deck or whatever, the dual face card from the base set. The pest creature. Anyway, attacking pests you control get +1/+0 and have menace. And then whenever a non-token creature you control dies, make a pest. So basically, if people kill your stuff, you get pests, and then your pests essentially become 2/1s with menace. Sure. Bold Plagiarist. 4 mana for a 2/2 with flash. Whenever an opponent puts one or more counters on a creature they control, they put the same number and kind of counters on Bold Plagiarist. So basically, you flash this in response to your opponent doing some big counterplay, and then also this does act as a deterrent for them doing that more. That being said, it doesn't work with like loyalty counters, because like yes, the Bold Plagiarist will get the loyalty counters, but those don't matter. I'm not really sure what this card is trying to do, honestly. It's like funny and a clever design and like a fun little sort of like lore moment story thing, but in practice, this is just going to be like kind of big for 4 mana. I guess. I don't know. I'm not excited about it. Cutting Rhetoric, I think, is a really fun card. This is the kind of Rattlesnake card that I think is actually like more effective, again, because of the mind games that it plays. So it says for 3 mana, it's an enchantment. Whenever an opponent attacks you and or one or more planeswalkers you control, so basically anytime an opponent attacks stuff in your direction, exile the top card of that player's library, and then you may play that card for as long as it remains exiled, and you may spend mana as over any color. So again, it's that same sort of Author of Shadows, Gaunty, you know, Thief of Sanity type effects. The reason I think that this is going to be effective where other types of like Rattlesnake don't attack me deterrents aren't, is that people hate having their cards stolen from them so much. It is just a consistent psychological aspect of Magic players and EDH players. People don't like you getting to play with their cards. So they're going to have to think long and hard as to whether or not they want to attack you in exchange for you getting a card off the top of their deck. Now, it could just be a land, right? Like, you know, it's Schrodinger's card, right? We don't know what you're getting. It could be a bad card. And if your opponent has a way of, like, organizing the top of their deck, they can deliberately give you a bad card. So, like, there's downsides to this. But the upside is that if you get attacked, you get cards for free, and your opponents have that sort of, like, existential pain of having a card stolen from them, which, again, from years of experience playing the format and personal experience of having it done to me, is something people hate. Leave my cards alone. They're my cards. Don't touch them. Let me play with my cards. Stop playing with my cards. So this is a fun little card that's going to make people take a long, hard think about whether or not it's worth attacking you or your planeswalker. So I think it's cool. Essence Pulse is a 4 mana sorcery that gains you 2 life, and then says each player gets -X until end of turn, where X is the total amount of life you've gained this turn. So at base, this is 4 mana. All creatures get -2/-2. That's terrible. However, you're presumably playing this in a deck that's going to allow you to gain a reasonable amount of life. And if you can turn this into like -4/-4 or greater, suddenly we're kind of talking. Like now this is a pretty real spell. Now, is this card better than Damnation? No. Not really. Most of the time it's not going to be. Unless you have like a bunch of really big creatures and you're deliberately scaling this to only kill off the small creatures. That's a lot of hoops to jump through. Generally speaking, Damnation, Toxic Deluge, these are still going to be your bread and butter Wraths and Black. This is still a good effect, though. And if you're on the market for more life gain effects in Black, you could do a lot worse than this. Next one is Feign the Broker. They basically just turn Trading Post into a Black legendary creature. So it's a 3 mana 3/3. Says sack a creature. So these are all tap abilities. Tap to sack a creature and put 2 counters on another creature. Tap to remove a counter from a creature and create a treasure token. So of course you can remove one of the counters you put on a creature from the other ability. Sack an artifact, aka a treasure token you just created. Create a 2/1 white flying creature token with flying, which could also be the creature that you end up sacking to put counters on your thing. So like each ability feeds into the last in a very, I hate cameras and reverse cameras, but yeah, it's a very cyclical ability. And then of course you can just pay 4 black to untap it to like do multiple of those things in a single turn, kind of like, you know, turn all the knobs and spin all the things and, you know, dirtle as hard as you possibly can. It's a very interesting card. I think it's probably an okay card. you need to have a very specific plan for this card in mind. You can't just be doing this for no reason. But if you're able to like make those abilities all synergize with each other and do cool things, I think you'll find you're like doing pretty good stuff. Incarnation Technique is the black demonstrate card. It says mill 5 cards, then return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Notably, this does not have to be a card that came from the 5 milled cards. It's just sort of feeding itself if you have nothing to go by at base.
Okay.
I saw. That's funny.
So funny.
That is funny. But if you decide to demonstrate it, then you get to essentially mill 5, reanimate a creature, then mill 5 again, reanimate another creature. The only downside being, of course, again, an opponent gets to do the same thing. Now, this one is a lower downside because you could probably target an opponent that you know is less likely to have meaningful hits in their deck. But still comes with a risk. But this is a more easily mitigated risk than most. That being said, it's still a 5-mana reanimation spell, which is like kind of unimpressive just by itself. So, again, not super impressed, but it's not terrible. It's not terrible. Keen Duelist is a fun little card. 2-mana 2/2 at the beginning of your upkeep. So this is kind of doing a bit of a Dark Confidant impression. At the beginning of your upkeep, you and target opponent each reveal the top card of your library, and then you each lose life equal to the mana value of the card revealed by the other player. So you basically are having a duel, right? And whoever has the bigger thing hits harder. And then you each put the revealed card in your hand. So no matter what, you and the target opponent are going to get to draw an extra card, right? That's the sort of the Bob aspect of things. I've heard people saying that this is going to be like really funny in Rakdos Lord of Riots, where like you're just revealing like Eldrazi and dragons and demons and stuff and just doming your opponent for a ton every time. You are letting an opponent draw a card, which is, again, never without risk. But if you're playing it in a deck with a high enough mana cost, it's probably going to be worthwhile. Next is Marshland Bloodcaster. 4 and a black for a 3/5 with flying, and then for 2 black and a tap, 1 black and tap. Rather than pay the mana cost of the next spell you cast this turn, you may pay life equal to that spell's mana value. So like this is a potentially very powerful effect with like obviously a very high downside of like hurting you really badly. But getting to essentially spend 2 mana and a bunch of life to cast a potentially large game-winning spell instead of mana that you don't have can be a big deal. So expect this card to do like some pretty scary things if it gets to do its thing. Now it has a tap ability, so like this is no Bolas' Citadel, which is essentially just that all the time. But still, Bolas' Citadel is a really powerful card, and even a neutered version of Bolas' Citadel is still something to be worth considering, I think. Then we've got Stinging Study, 5 mana for an instant, draw X and lose X, where X is the mana value of a commander you own on the battlefield or in the command zone. So basically, draw X and lose X, where X is your commander's converted mana cost. Seems fine. I mean, for 5 mana, it's a lot. Like, for 5 mana, if I'm not drawing at least 4 cards, I'm probably not happy about it. The problem is, you don't want to draw too many cards, you're going to lose a lot of life, and that's a little bit scary too. There's probably a sweet spot between about 4 and 6, I think, where it's quite strong. Any less, and it's not worth the 5 mana. Any more, and you're risking either overdrawing or killing yourself. So you gotta be careful. But it's cool, though. Next, we've got Tivash Gloom Summoner. At the beginning of your end step, if you gain life this turn, you may pay X life, or X is the amount of life you gain this turn. If you do, make an XX Black Demon. So basically, it lets you turn your life gain into life loss / a demon. And it's a 4/4 lifelink unto itself. So at the very least, essentially, you can, at the end of each end step, if you got to attack with Tivash, essentially go neutral on life gained and life lost that turn, right? You gained 4 life, then paid 4 life, so you're breaking even, but you're getting a 4/4 black flying demon into play on each exchange, and that's pretty cool. And again, if you got other ways of gaining life, converting that life gain into random big flyers is pretty powerful. Not the cheapest card. 5 mana is still a pretty hefty cost, but you know, getting free flying beaters is not a bad one. Vainwitch Covenant is the next one. It's a 3 mana 3/3 menace, and then it says whenever you gain life, you may pay black, and if you do, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So, it's fine. Basically, gaining life, any instance of life gain, if you got a random mana lying around, you get a Gravedigger effect. It's pretty good. It's a decent little body for 3. I don't hate it. If you're getting a lot of life, you'll probably get some value out of this. If you're not, why is it in your deck? Probably that simple. Audacious Reshapers, 3 mana 3/3 with tap, sack, and artifact. Reveal cards from the top of your library till you reveal an artifact card. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom. and the Reshapers deals damage to you equal to the number of cards revealed this way. So the more artifacts you have in your deck, the less damage you're going to take from this. But you got to be careful, because if you hit like a slew of like 5 cards and then an artifact, like you're taking 5 right there. Like that's not nothing. So, you know, it's essentially like it's like a birthing pod for artifacts basically, but it's a bit random because it's red. I think this card's probably going to do some cool things. You'll probably see some very splashy plays happen as a result of this, but you're also probably going to see people like blow themselves up trying to do this, which is actually part of the flavor, which I think is funny, but in practice may not work as well as intended. So we'll see. Battle Mage Bracers is just basically another copy of Illusionist Bracers. It gives some haste as well, but basically it's just Illusionist Bracers. It's a fine card. If your deck wanted Bracers and it's red, great. Here's another copy. If not, probably pass. Creative Technique is your red demonstrate spell. It's fine. So 5 mana, exile or shuffle your library, then reveal cards from the top till you hit it on land. You get to exile that card and play it for free. If you demonstrate, you get to do that twice, but your opponent gets to do that once. So again, be careful who you're targeting with this, because you may choose somebody that's doing some nasty things, like nastier things than you are. So, you know, it's very red in that way, right? A little bit chaotic, a little bit random, but potentially quite powerful. You'll know if you want this spell. It's pretty cool, but it might do nothing. Cursed Mirror, I think, is one of the coolest cards out of this entire set. The commander set, that is. 3 mana for a red mana rock. In and of itself, not terribly exciting, but not a bad floor. The really cool part is the fact that it ETBs as a copy of a creature until end of turn with haste. So it's basically 3 mana for a clone of any creature on the battlefield. It ETBs as that, so you will get any ETB abilities of the creature you copied, and you get to attack with haste on that turn. And then after you're done doing all that and getting whatever value you want out of it, you still have a mana rock lying around after that. So, you know, it's not a 3 mana clone, just period. That would be very good in red especially. But still, the one-shot clone effect with the haste and the ETB value, just then turning into a red mana rock, it's just like a good set of abilities at a very reasonably costed cost. Not the most elegant phrase I've ever said, but yeah, no, generally just a very solid card, and definitely one I think that you should keep an eye out on. There's a lot of decks that you're going to be surprised to find yourself being like, oh, you know what, this would be really cool in this deck. Fiery Encore is a card with Storm, which is pretty interesting. They did print a new Storm card. So it says, it's 5 mana sorcery, discard a card, then draw a card. When you discard a non-land card this way, Fiery Encore deals damage equal to that card's mana value to target creature or planeswalker. It has Storm. This card's not good. It's just, no, don't play this card. Basically, rummage, and then kill creatures based on the cards you rummaged, and then for each spell you've cast, you get to do that again. I don't know. It's fine. Obviously, you can pick off a few different creatures with this, but again, if you're killing big creatures, it's because you're discarding spells with like reasonable mana cost, and that means you're probably discarding like actual real spells to do that. Because even though you get all the Storm copies for free, each of the Storm copies is still requiring you to discard different spells, right? So you're not gaining cards out of this or anything. This is you know, them being afraid of printing broken Storm cards, which is fine. I prefer that the Storm cards be not good enough than too good, certainly. But this one is definitely not a big thing, so don't do this. Inferno Project is a 7 mana OO with Trample. It enters the battlefield with X counters on it, where X is the total mana value of instants and sorcery cards in your graveyard. So this is potentially just enormous, right? Like you cast a bunch of like 2, 3, 4 mana cards, right? You've cast, you know, your preordains and your counter spells and your time walks or whatever. I don't know what you're doing. Your burn spells, and then this just comes in, counts them all up, and then just is a big old chonker. So, you know, rewards you for playing a bunch of instants and sorceries by giving you a potentially undercosted enormous beater with Trample. Now, it still costs 7, so, like, what do you need for me to be happy about this? Like, I probably want this to be, like, a 10-10. Like, maybe, I don't know how easy that is. I don't know. Probably pass, but it's definitely got, like, a lot of casual appeal, I think. Next is Laelia, the Blade Reforged. 3 mana for a 2/2 haste. Whenever it attacks, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn, notably not without paying its mana cost. You do still have to pay the mana cost. Whenever you exile one or more cards from your library and your graveyards, put a 1/1 counter on Lealia. Decent little card advantage, pseudo card advantage engine for red. It's very reasonably statted. I actually think this is more of like a cube card than it is a commander card. Not that it won't see any play in commander at all, but I think that it's that sort of aggression and card draw is more beneficial in a 1v1 format again than it is in a 4v or 1v3 format. So I'm not super high on it, but it's not like for a commander, but it is a cool little card and definitely has a reasonable ability. Radiant Performer, 5 for a 2/2 with Flash. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it from your hand, choose target spell or ability that targets only a single permanent or player. Copy that spell or ability for each other permanent or player the spell could target. So this is basically like ultimate chaos. This is basically somebody targets like a creature with Swords to Plowshares, and then in response you flash this in, and now they're basically just putting a copy of Swords to Plowshares on the stack for every single creature on the board. So this just turns the 1 mana removal into a massive exile board wipe. I don't know. Basically, this is just like one of those things where somebody's going to cast like Chaos Warp, and then you're going to flash in Radiant Performer, and now everybody has to Chaos Warp their entire board, and everyone's going to be real grumpy at you, but it's going to be kind of funny. I don't know how I feel about this card. This is just pure chaos. Like, this is just nonsense. But it will probably create some very flashy and memorable moments. Again, use with caution, because depending on your playgroup, they may get very cross with you for doing this. But if your playgroup is into the chaos, they embrace the chaos, then this is going to lead to some very silly nonsense. Next is Riona Fire Dancer, 5 mana 3/4. At the beginning of your combat on each turn, create X tokens that are copies of another target creature you control, where X is 1 plus the number of instants or sorceries you've cast this turn. They gain haste. Exile them at the beginning of the next end step. So notably, this is X plus 1. So even if you've cast literally 0 instants and sorceries, you will still get 1 token with haste, which means that this goes infinite with a number of creatures, such as basically anything that generates extra combats will create infinite combats, because you'll get, what is it? I'm trying to remember what the card is. Port Razor. Although that one needs to deal damage. And then there's the one from Amonkhet that I'm forgetting right now. Combat Celebrant, I think it's called. If you make a copy of Combat Celebrant, you will get infinite combats, because you exert the token copy, get an extra combat, exert the token copy, get an extra combat, and just keep going. So potentially like involved in some infinite combos with combat, but otherwise just like, again, doing fun UTB nonsense things. Seems like a pretty cool card. Seems like a pretty fun card. It's 5 mana, which means it's not going to just be a shoe into everything, but it's got a big splashy effect, and that's usually enough to make it see enough play in a format like this. All right, now we've got Rousing Refrains. We had the Rousing something in blue. Now we've got the red version. This one is 5 mana to add a red for each card in target opponent's hand, and then that mana stays in your phase until the end of your turn, or in your pool until the end of your turn. Then you exile with 3 counters, and you can also suspend it for 3, so you'll get to cast it on turn 5, turn 8, turn 11, and so on. Again, not really high on this. You're not going to get to do this very often, and paying 5 mana for this effect is not good. Jessica's Will was recently printed in the Commander Legends. That's just like this card, but like 1,000 times better. Just play Jessica's Will in your deck. Don't play this in your deck. Ruin Grinder is an interesting card. It's not my cup of tea, but it is cool. It's a 5 mana 7/4 with Menace, or sorry, 6 mana 7/4 with Menace, which is like fine. And then if it dies, aka your opponent probably like double blocked it or something, so you've traded it for a couple of cards. Each player may discard their hand and draw 7 cards. Now the part I don't like about this is that, again, it says each player. And it also says discard their hand and draw 7 cards. It's not draw that many cards, right? So if your opponents are closer to being hellbent than you are, right? They've got 2, maybe 3 cards in hand. They're like kind of whatever. You're just gassing your opponents back up to 7 for free. In fact, you're like begging them. You played your own creature. You're begging them to kill this so that they can gas their hand back up. This is really dangerous. This is going to lead to them untapping with 7 fresh cards in hand and murdering the whole table. I'm not a fan of effects like this, because you're not even guaranteed to get first crack at those 7 cards, and that's not a good thing for you or for anybody that isn't the exact next player in line at the table from you. Don't play this card. I don't like it. Surge to Victory is really cool. Somebody mentioned that this is kind of busted with Time Walk effects. Exile target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. Creatures you control get +X/+O until end of turn, where X is that card's mana value. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player this turn, copy the exiled cards, and you may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. So, hypothetical scenario. I've got a board of 3 flying 1/1s. I have a Time Walk in my graveyard. I cast Surge to Victory, giving all 3 of my 1/1 flyers +5/+O until end of turn. So now I'm attacking with 3 6/1 flyers. Each time each of those 6/1 flyers deals combat damage, I get to put a copy of Time Walk onto the stack for free. This is pretty good. This is pretty strong. It's not strong with all things all the time, but like it's strong with a lot of different effects. Even if like I'm thinking like, I've got Explosive Vegetation, or again, whatever the most recent best version of that card is, right? I've got Explosive Vegetation in my graveyard. I cast Surge to Victory, give all of my random creatures +4/+O, and then every time any of them hits, I get to just search my library for 2 basic lands, put them into play. So I'm ramping like, 4, 6, 8 lands without too much difficulty. Again, very, very strong, right? It costs 6 mana, so like you're not paying nothing for the effect, but it's like I'm getting a bunch of damage in, and I'm getting a bunch of like sweet extra spell triggers out of it. And therefore extra board presence, extra cards in hand, whatever. This card is going to do some dumb things when it resolves. Not every deck's going to play it, but like be scared when this card resolves. All right, we're finally moving on to green. We are nearing the end of this. Blossoming Bogbeast. 5 mana for a 3/3 that says whenever it attacks, gain 2 life, and then creatures you control gain trample and +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the amount of life you gain this turn. So this is essentially a life gain dependent overrun that will always at worst be +2/+2 in trample on a 5-drop. It doesn't have haste or anything. This is no Craterhoof, obviously. But it's still pretty good. And again, if you're able to gain even another 2 life from some random thing happening, again, I keep saying Essence Warden, but like genuinely that is a good thing to be doing here, right? This is very easily an actual overrun, and like with literally a single extra life gained. And if you're gaining 2, 3 life before the actual Blossoming trigger attacks, the Blossoming Beast trigger attacks, that's a big overrun, right? That's like +4/+4/+5/+5 in trample your whole team on a 5-drop. Like, I don't think every deck's going to want this, but I do think that this attack, like, if you are playing a go-wide life gain deck, this is a really decent finisher. I think this will do a lot of work for not a lot of cost. The next one is Ezalroot Channeler. It's a 6 mana 4/6 with reach, and it says creature spells you cast cost X less to cast, where X is the amount of life you've gained this turn. So again, if you're gaining life, this is a very powerful effect, right? A cost reduction for all your creatures, and it does have tap to gain 2. So at minimum, each turn, if you're willing to tap this proactively, which might not be the best thing, because sometimes you really kind of want to hold up your 4/6 reach with so that it can block things. But you can make all your creature spells every turn cost 2 mana less. And again, if you're gaining 1 or 2 more life, like suddenly you're basically just playing all your creatures for only their colored mana cost. You're basically eliminating all colorless mana cost as soon as you've gained, 3 to 4 life on a turn, which is pretty cool. Again, situational. Obviously, you want to be playing a deck with a lot of life gain, but it's a good effect. It's a powerful effect in those decks. Fractal Harness is X2 and a green for an equipment with equip 2. When it ETBs, you make an OO fractal with X counters on it, so that's what the X cost in the thing here is. And then whenever equipped creature attacks, double the number of counters on it. Oh, and you also attach the Fractal Harness directly to the fractal when it enters the battlefield. So you're essentially paying 3 and X to make an XX that has this ability, and then next turn when it attacks, it'll double that X, right? So you pay 6 mana to make a 3/3, and then next turn you attack, and it's attacking as a 6/6, and then the following turn you attack, and it's 12/12. We're getting to Christmas land scenarios here a little bit. It doesn't grant any evasion, no trample, no menace, no flying, nothing, but it's okay. It's essentially like a weird version of like Living Weapon. Or even the more recent ones from Kaldheim, right? There was one uncommon artifact that created a creature and auto-equipped if you pay the extra cost. Notably, you can also just pay 3 mana for this, right? And not get a fractal and just equip it to something else at a later point in time and start attacking with that. You don't have to pay the X It's just that if you choose to pay the X, you will get a Fractal and get to auto-equip it the first time. So, you know, do what you want with that. Next one is Guardian Augmenter. I think this is probably going to be one of the better cards out of this set just because of its sort of flexibility, its viability. When this creature enters, or sorry, not when this creature enters the battlefield, rather, but this creature has Flash. So it's a 3-mana 2/2 with Flash. Gives all commander creatures, so again, this is accounting for partners and things like that you control, get +2/+2. And also more importantly, I think, they get hexproof. So this is a great card to put into any of your like lightning rod commander decks, right? If you have a commander that is, I mean, obviously at least base green, and it tends to attract a lot of removal because it's got some big splashy scary effect, right? Again, I'm thinking about Yarok, I'm thinking about Zakama, I'm thinking about Muldrotha, all of these sort of like, holy crap, this thing needs to die or we're going to lose the game commanders. Guardian Augmenter gives you a lot of breathing room on that by granting them hexproof. Not going to help you against the Wrath, but it will make that single target removal look pretty embarrassing. Next one is Healing Technique. This is the green one. This card is very bad. It's just very bad. It's a 4-mana regrowth that gains you some life. You can do it twice, then your opponent gets to do it. Just by regrowth. This card's terrible. That's it. Paradox Zone, 5 mana, ETBs with a growth counter on it, and at the beginning of your end step, double the number of growth counters on it, and then make a fractal with X counters, where X is the number of growth counters. So on the first turn, it's going to make a 2/2, then it's going to make a 4/4, then it's going to make an 8/8 each turn that you let it go. At a certain point, you'll probably be able to win the game with all your fractals. It starts at 5 mana, so it's not like you get the ball rolling on this super early or anything, but it's a cool card, and it once you play it, it's a bit of a set it, forget it kind of thing. You don't need to do any more work to get the stuff out of it. Plays well with things like Proliferate, obviously, things like that. Doubling season effects, of course, all those good things. It's a neat card. Again, you'll know if you want it. Not every deck does, but it's pretty cool. Pest Infestation is XX green to destroy up to X artifacts and or enchantments. And then you create twice X pests. So essentially, you're going to get pests equal to the amount of X that you actually got, or the amount of mana that you actually paid into it, but only kill X artifacts. So use case here, I pay 5 mana, right? X, like green, 2/2. I get to blow up 2 artifacts and I get 4 pests. If it's 3, if X and X are 3, I get to blow up 3 artifacts and I make 6 pests, and so on. It's fine. I'm not a big fan of effects like this generally, but it is a nice combination of being sort of a artifact removal spell that also gives you a bunch of creatures. So if you're on the market for both of those modes, might be okay for you. But if you don't care about the pests, then there are better options for artifact removal and enchantment removal. Ruxa is an interesting one. This is a bit of a gimme for the vanilla tribal players, right? So Ruxa, Patient Professor. When she enters the battlefield or attacks, you get to return target creature with no abilities from your graveyard to your hand. So you basically get to rebuy all your vanilla creatures. Vanilla creatures get +1/+1. And then creatures you control with no abilities assign their combat damage as though they weren't blocked. So basically they all have pseudo unblockable. Now they can still be blocked and killed, but if you would rather just deal the damage directly to your opponent rather than trade with the creature that blocked it, you have the choice of doing that. This is actually a really cool commander for like a deck that would be like weirdly very boring to play, but very interesting to play when Ruxa is actually out. I'm almost tempted to like throw a list together and see what it would look like and how bad it would probably be. Because again, remember that like Trample isn't even good, right? Like I can't play Colossal Dreadmaw in this deck because that has Trample and that no longer counts as no abilities, right? But you do get to play like Crawworm, which is a 6/4 for 6. That would work in this deck, right? It would be a 7/5 and it would get to deal 7 damage as it were unblocked. Like, I don't know how good this card is. I really don't, but it's an interesting deck and definitely does a very unique thing that no other commander has so far been able to do, or provided the option to do. I look forward to seeing a lot of the meme decks trying to play this for sure. Next we have Sequence Engine. Basically this is a 3-mana artifact that does nothing when it comes into play, but for X and tap, you can exile a creature card with mana value X from a graveyard and then create a fractal with X counters on it. So pay 3 mana and tap it, exile a card with mana value 3 from a yard, Doesn't have to be yours, can be anybody's. And then get a 3/3 Fractal. Kind of unexciting, kind of boring. It's a little bit annoying that like the X has to correspond to the creature with mana value X. So I can't like pay 5 mana and exile a 3-drop and make a 5/5. I have to pay 5 and only exile a creature with like it's a little like restrictive, but it's fine. I honestly think that they could have done without the tap here and it would have been fine. Because again, you are going to be limited to the amount of mana you have and whether or not that corresponds to the mana values of creatures in people's yards. I don't think you could like go off with this or anything. Like even with infinite mana, you're going to eventually run out of creatures and then you won't get to do anything. So I don't know. It's fine. I'm not excited about it. Sprout Bag Trudge is a 9 mana 9/7 with trample, but it costs X less to cast, where X is the amount of life you've gained this turn. So again, a potential 2 mana 9/7 trample if you've gained 7 life, which in some decks is probably pretty trivial. There are probably decks that can just consistently make this cost 2 very easily. And then also at the beginning of your end step, if you gained life this turn, you may cast the Trudge from your graveyard. So even if this gets killed, even if this gets milled over, whatever, as long as it hasn't been exiled or shuffled back in, you can actually just cast this. And it's funny because you actually cast it from your graveyard in your end steps. You're actually casting it a bit as a special action. Like normally you wouldn't be able to do this. But yeah, any turn where you've gained a bunch of life and this is just kind of hanging out in your graveyard, you just get to cast this for cheap. Which I think is kind of cool, actually. Like I think this is actually like a pretty sweet little card. Don't be fooled by the ludicrously large mana cost. This will probably be a very small, very efficient beater a lot of the time. Next is Drudge Garden. 3 mana for an enchantment. Whenever you gain life, you may pay 2. If you do, make a 4/4 creature with trample. Again, if you're playing a deck that's gaining a lot of life, probably good. If you're not, probably bad. That's it. Yadora Grave Gardener is a really cool card. I'm not entirely sure how good this card is yet, but it has a lot of potential. So it's a 5 mana 5/5 that says whenever a non-token creature you control dies, you may return it to the battlefield face down under its owner's control. It's a forest land. So basically, if you don't have any use for the creatures you're controlling when they die, like if you're not planning on buying them back with anything or whatever, you can just use them to ramp you. So anytime a creature you control dies, you basically get to ramp using the flip side of the dead creature. It's a very strange card mechanically, but like turning your dead creatures, non-token creatures notably, but turning your dead creatures into ramp is a really powerful ability. So I'll be curious to see what this card ends up doing over time, because it's a cool card. Next we finally have a couple of gold cards, one for each of the decks. They're all pretty good, actually. I will say, like, these ones are quite strong. So there's Ink Shield, which is the 5 mana instant. It says prevent all combat damage that will be dealt to you this turn. So it's a fog, right? But it's only combat damage, so it doesn't stop burn and stuff like that. But prevent all combat damage that will be dealt to you this turn. For each 1 damage prevented this way, create a 2/1 Inkling with flying. So basically, if your opponent, like this, so this is very similar to Arachnogenesis from a couple of Commander precons ago, where it was a 3 mana fog, and for each creature that was attacking you, you made a 1/2 with reach. This is a little bit different. This is a bit more of an offensive version of that, right? The reach creatures are much better on defense because you could ambush the creatures and eat them with all the spiders you just created. This works a bit differently. This basically just goads your opponent into like attacking you, and then you just get a bunch of 2/1s, and then you can just use those 2/1s to murder them. So like imagine your opponent is attacking you with like a 4/4 and a 3, like a 4 power creature, a 3 power creature, and like a 6 power creature, right? Like just decent attacks, sending all the big things at you, right? Do whatever. 4 power, 6 power, 3 power. That is 13 power damage that you prevented. So you get to make 13 2/1 flyers, which is 26 flying damage in the air that you get to untap with and probably just do a whole lot of murder. Because that is a ton of power. And it's all evasive because it flies. So, like, this card is going to be a blowout and a half when it works. It's 5 mana, so you're not just holding this up all the time easily or anything. But, like, this is going to lead to some spectacularly brutal reversals of fortune. And it's going to be pretty epic when it happens. I think this card's really cool. Oversimplify is probably, like, the most powerful card out of the whole precons, I think. I also kind of hate that it exists because it is a massive color pie break, in my opinion, for colors that just didn't need more help. So for 5 mana, it's a sorcery, and it says exile all creatures. So this is essentially just an exile wrath for 5 mana in Simic. Okay. So there's that. Each player creates a fractal and puts a number of counters on it equal to the total power of creatures they control that were exiled this way. So basically, count up all your power. Everybody gets 1 fractal, and it's an XX, where X is the total amount of power for the cards that they lost to this effect. So everybody ends up with essentially 1 large-ish creature, probably. And then everything else is just exiled. But it's 5 mana. 5 mana, exile everything. And then everybody gets 1 big thing. And again, 1 big thing is a lot easier to deal with in a lot of boards than a bunch of medium things. This card is really, really strong. Like, obscenely strong. A 5 mana exile wrath in Simic is nonsensical, as far as I'm concerned. I really kind of hate it because of the color pie break, but holy crow is it powerful. Like, this is no Cyclonic Rift, but like, still. That's because Cyclonic Rift is messed up. This is a bit less messed up, but still really messed up. Anyway. Next one, Reinterpret. Instant, blue-red 2. Counter target spell, you may cast a spell with an equal or lesser mana value from your hand without paying its mana cost. So again, this has a ton of potential upside, a ton of potential blowout possibilities, but it's a bit clunky. A 4 mana counter spell is not amazing, and in order for it to do something, you also need to be holding on to a spell that costs less than the spell you countered. So like, a lot of things need to line up here to like make you get the value. On the times that you get to do the whole thing, right? You counter their 6-drop and cast the free 5-drop, like, man, it's gonna feel really good. But sometimes you're gonna like counter their 1-drop and you won't have a card, or you'll counter their 9-drop, but you just don't have a card in your hand that works that way. Or it's not beneficial for you to cast it. Like, it's at the end of the day, it's a 4 mana counter with like some conditional upside. I actually don't think this card is very good. Again, there will be times where it does a bunch of stuff and you'll be like, wow, what a blowout. But I think that this is like the one of these 5 that has like the most fail case and is like the most like needing to line up all the pieces correctly to get there on it. Yeah, I don't think we're going to find that this is excellent. Also, I just realized that there's been a thing in front of my captions the whole time. That's annoying. Oh well. Revival Experiment, I think, is really good. So for 6 mana, you may return up to 1 card of each permanent type to the battlefield directly, and then you lose 3 life for each card returned this way. So there are 5 types of permanent in the game, right? Creature, Planeswalker, Artifact, Enchantment, Land. So you're potentially losing up to 15 life, but you're also potentially returning up to 5 permanents directly to play for 6 mana. And that's probably representing anywhere in the neighborhood of like 10 to 15 mana worth of permanents for 6 mana. That's really, really good. This card is super strong. It's a gambit. You're potentially losing a lot of life, but like, you're going to get a massive amount of board presence out of this if you're able to check all the boxes. This is similar to my thing about Reconstruct earlier in the set reviews. It has a fail case. You really kind of want to try to get 1 of each if you can. But if you get to do the whole thing, if you get to just go and get all 5 things back, oh boy, you're doing it. Our last gold card is Wake the Past. It is a 7 mana sorcery, but it says return all artifact cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. So just a mass revival of all your dead artifacts, whatever they might be, however large or small. And then they gain haste. So obviously, if it's like a mana rock, we don't care. But if we're talking about artifact creatures, that's really cool. Not every deck wants this, but again, if you're playing a graveyard-based artifact creature recursion type thinger, which like a lot of the cards from the new set incline you to want to be doing, then this is pretty cool. Great with those Gear Hulks and everything else. Elementalist Palette. Palette? That was a Frenchism. Palette. Elementalist Palette. 3 mana whenever, and it's at base it is a 3 mana rock, a rainbow rock. Whenever you cast a spell with X in its cost, put 2 counters on it. And then you may tap it, instead of adding a mana of any color, you can tap to add colorless for each charge counter on it, but you can only spend this on cards that contain X. So this is probably like a pretty cool card for like that Sultai Hydra deck, or really any Hydra deck that exists because, you know, X costs, that's cool, that's fun. It's just very narrow, very niche. It's obviously good with like fireballs and things like that, but on the balance, I'm not super excited about this. It's going to go into a couple of very specific decks, and that's going to be about it. Geometric Nexus, 2-mana artifact. Whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, put a number of charge counters on the Nexus equal to that spell CMC. For 6 mana and tap, you remove all charge counters from it and make a fractal, where X is the number of counters removed this way. So you basically, like, every few turns get to pay 6 mana to make a, you know, 6/6, 7/7 kind of thing. This does say a player, so, like, it's not just your instants and sorceries. And because it does come down early, the first one you make is probably going to be pretty chunky, right? People are casting their Rampant Growth and their Cultivate, so that's 2 counters, 3 counters, another 3 counters. That's like 8 counters now. So the first time you're going to activate this, it's going to be like 6 mana, make an 8/8 or a 9/9 pretty easily. It's going to fall off after that because that first turn is going to be like the one where like you've been waiting a few turns because you couldn't activate it yet, so you may as well just build it up to a large creature. I don't know how good it is after that, but it is cool, and it is probably decent. I don't think it's incredible or anything, but it is a pretty cool card. It is expensive, though. 6 mana to do this is not nothing. That being said, you can do it at instant speed. It does not force you to do it at sorcery. Another soapbox moment here. Tempting Contract. Never put this card in your deck. It's not good. Don't do it. This is, if your opponents are intelligent, this is a blank piece of cardboard. 4 mana, at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent may create a treasure token. For each opponent who does, you create a treasure token. So the hypothetical scenario is that on your upkeep, each opponent chooses to get a treasure token, and then you get 3 treasure tokens. Your opponent should not do this. Opponents, if your opponent, or people, if your opponent casts this card, do not take a treasure token. It's not worth it. You're going to accelerate your opponent like way too much. You're going to get 1, they're going to get 3. That basic math, 3 is better than 1. They're going to have a better turn than you are with your 1 lonely treasure token. Don't do it. The problem is you need to talk to the other 2 players at the table, because if they both do it and you don't, you're extra screwed. You're all still screwed, except for the person with this tempting contract, but you're extra screwed because you got nothing out of it. The bottom line is you should not play this card in your deck if you assume that your opponents are intelligent. If you assume your opponents are extremely greedy or extremely loose, then maybe you can think about it, because you'll probably just get a bunch of free wins. Don't put this in your deck if you think your opponents are smart. End of rant. Last artifact is Triplicate Titan. 9 mana, 9/9 with Flying, Vigilance, and Trample. When Triplicate Titan dies, create a 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature with Flying, a 3/3 with Vigilance, and a 3/3 with Trample. So again, the joke here is that when it dies, it splits into its 3 component parts, and each of them has one of the key abilities, and each of them is 1/3 of the power and toughness. Decent card. Great sack fodder, obviously. But like unbelievably expensive. Where I like this is like, again, in a deck like Osric or whatever his name is, like the commander for Boros, where you can like pitch this into your graveyard early on, and then like make copies of this with like Feldon or something like that. Like making copies of this with Feldon sounds absurd. So that's a pretty cool use case for this. There's Study Hall, but it's bad. Don't play it. Full stop. And then the last land is Witch's Clinic, which is a colorless land that lets you give your commander lifelink for 2 mana. It's kind of random, but it's not the worst. If you want to give your commander lifelink, this is not a terrible way to do it. It is a colorless land, which is a cost in many decks, but there are worse lands. It's fine. I don't hate it. And then the rest of these are all just reprint cards. We're not going to talk about those. That's not what we're here for. So yeah, that brings us to the end of my Commander product review for Strixhaven. And I guess at the end of the series for this. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. I think this is what I'm going to be sticking to doing for future sets, is just doing Commander specific reviews. It's a little bit less demanding on my time. I mean, I'm still clocking in at about 4.5 hours here from start to finish. Which is a lot of time, but it's a lot better than the like 6 to 8 hours I think it took me to do the limited set review. So yeah, that'll be the format for the next set, which I think is the Dungeons and Dragons set. So I don't know, look forward to that, I guess. But yeah, in the meantime, thank you very much for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, and thank you as well if you're watching this on Twitch right now. Do like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. It does help the channel grow. It helps gain more visibility. and lets me know that people are enjoying this content and that you want to see more of it. But yeah, until the next set, thank you ever so much, and take it easy.